You're listening to the Blue Ridge True Crime Podcast, bringing you compelling true crime stories from the Appalachian Mountains and beyond. I'm your host, Alfred Dockery. Grab your hat and a lantern, and let's get on the trail. In today's episode, we're going underground to examine the story of two North Carolina moonshiners. Charles Folias, the fabled whiskey caveman, said to have run a secret still in the Gaston County cave, and Huldah Nines, the woman Blockade distiller who outsmarted revenuers with her hidden operation beside the Neuse River in Wake County. One's a myth and the other's a brilliant bootlegger, but which is which? Come along as we try and separate fact from fiction and discover how wildlife played a major role in both stories. Charles Folias, Whiskey Caveman. On September 29, 1882, a Gaston County, North Carolina moonshiner made the front page in the New York Times. The short item read as follows: Novel capture of a moonshiner, driven from his hiding place by rattlesnakes. Dateline, Dallas, North Carolina. An old moonshiner named Charles Folias, for whom the revenue officers had been searching for a long time, was captured in the northern part of this county yesterday under somewhat peculiar circumstances. Folias operated with illicit stills in a small corner on the side of a creek. In order to prevent the officers from tracking him to his hiding place, he always waded the stream and thus avoided making any tracks. Yesterday, a gang of officers were in the neighborhood of the illicit still, hunting other moonshiners supposed to be at that locality. Folias became aware of their presence and made for his hole in the ground with all possible speed. Upon entering the mouth of the cavern, the illicit distiller discovered a nest of rattlesnakes. He managed to reach the boiler and seize a dipper of boiling corn juice, which he hurled at his assailants. He soon dispatched the snakes, but before he could make his way to a place of safety in the cave, several of the venomous reptiles continued the attack. Folias saw that if he remained, he would be killed, and he took the only alternative which seemed to be left, backed out of his underground stillhouse, and gave himself up to the government officers outside with the remark, "Gentlemen, I want it understood that I was forced to surrender on account of the infernal snakes inside, and you deserve no credit for it." The officers had been hunting Folias in vain for years. From the serpentine creeks of Gaston County, we travel 21 years into the future and 190 miles to the northeast for the story of Huldah Nines, woman Blockade distiller. This is the story of another underground still. Most of the following information is from the front page of the Friday, February 6, 1903 Gaston Gazette, which includes a note crediting a Raleigh dispatch to the Richmond News. Revenue officers suspected a still was operating near Hester and Thompson's mill in northern Wake County, along the banks of the Neuse River, in an immense canebrake known as the Hurricanes. The 3 by 5 mile area was covered by a dense growth of cane from 7 to 10 feet high, growing on the swampy ground. Agents had been searching for a blockade still there for years. They discovered several places where stills had recently been. They raided every foot of land for a mile around the mill without finding any signs of the still. Last November, revenue agents Starkey Hare and Dr. J.W. Perkins were raiding near the still when they noticed large flocks of wild ducks below the mill dam on the river. They decided it was a bad day to raid, but a good day to duck hunt, and took up a position on the river bank. The men noticed that the ducks were vigorously feeding on something on top of the water. Investigating, they discovered that the ducks were eating cornmeal bran. Cooked cornmeal bran. There was only one thing this could be: slop from a moonshine still emptied into the river. There was no bran above the mill, so there had to be some connection between the mill and an illicit distillery. The mill house was a 2-story wooden building built into the side of the slope beside the dam and surrounded by woods. In cold weather, it was heated by a huge fireplace. The dam across the river was about 15 feet high and about 80 yards long. To prevent logs from catching on the dam, a plank bed 6 feet wide was built to aid the logs over the dam. Hare and Perkins decided to stake out the mill to see who and what came and went. They saw the mill operator, Ray, and a woman named Huldah Nines come and go. Some days there would be brand floating in the river, other days there would not be. They had no idea where it was coming from. They did have one break. Traveling up and down the river, the agents discovered a landing with kegs floating in the water. They opened one and found it was full of corn whiskey. They left the kegs as they had found them. On one hand, they now knew they were definitely onto something. On the other hand, they didn't know where the kegs came from either. Convinced that the mill was at the heart of the matter, they returned at night, broke in, and searched the building. It turned out that the mill was, well, a mill. There was no sign of an illegal distillery. The next night, Nines returned, unlocked the mill, and went inside. The officers thought they had her now. The agents waited a few minutes, slipped into the building, and searched for her. She was nowhere to be seen. The woman had vanished. They waited inside until nearly daylight, and then returned to their outpost in the woods. When it became light, Hare and Perkins saw a thick column of black smoke rising from the mill's chimney, even though the fireplace inside the building had been empty and cold. After dark, Hare and Perkins again entered the mill and hid. From this vantage point, they saw Huldah Nines and a man by the name of Tilly arrive at the mill, walk to the dam, and vanish through the pouring water. The pair didn't return. The next night, Hare and Perkins tried it themselves. After getting soaked by water coming over the dam, they emerged on the other side and noticed a door in the side of the hill. It was securely locked. So they wet some flour into a paste and took an impression of the keyhole, went back to Raleigh, and had a key made. Their confidence in a key made from a quick and dirty flour impression was less than 100%, so they brought the locksmith, one T.F. Brockwell, back with them. The article does not tell us whether he was an enthusiastic member of this expedition, or if they had to wrestle him and his toolkit into a wagon. On their return to the mill, they found the river full of ducks and saw smoke pouring out of the mill's chimney. The officers knew the Moonshine still had to be running at full blast. At nightfall, Nines and Tilly came out and went home. The officers and Brockwell crossed under the dam and tried the key on the lock, but it was not a good fit. After considerable labor with Brockwell's tools, the key did its work, and they finally opened the door to reveal a concealed underground entrance. The entrance led to a 6-foot-long tunnel that opened into an underground room equipped with a complete whiskey distillery. It had been dug into the hillside and shored up with timber. Water moved from the dam to the still and then back outside, carrying the slop that attracted the ducks. Smoke from the still's furnace rose through the millhouse chimney, and a hole in the ground overhead, hidden by vegetation, provided ventilation. After 2 hours waiting, the officers heard the door open. In walked Huldah Nines. Hare and Perkins hid in a dark corner as she threw off the rubber coat she'd worn to pass through the pouring water. She then commenced to kindle up the fire under the furnace. At this point, Hare and Perkins stepped into the open. Nines looked at them in utter dismay and said, "Well, well, well. I've been running this still for 10 years, and I never expected you to find it." She told them the distillery was the handiwork of a man who had been dead for several years. He'd taught her how to run the operation. She then took a keg, rolled it to the door, put it in the river, and turned it loose. "You'll find that keg in a few minutes at a landing place about 400 yards down the river," she said. The agents already knew where the keg would fetch up. Hare and Perkins took the woman moonshiner off to jail. As they drove to Raleigh, they offered her a deal. If she would help them arrest her accomplice, Charlie Pierce, they'd let her off. Huldah Nines refused. She said she'd take her punishment, but she'd never betray her accomplices. So, which moonshiner is the real deal? Place your bets. Charles Folias, Whiskey Caveman, or Huldah Nines, Woman Blockader? The short 264-word article about Charles Folias had everything: an illicit moonshine distillery, a cave, a slippery moonshiner, and aggressive, venomous snakes. Big ones. The story was irresistible. So irresistible that on the same day, the same article appeared in the Boston Globe, the Lancaster Daily Intelligencer, which I hope I pronounced correctly, and the Indianapolis News. The story would appear in additional northern newspapers in early October, from the Buffalo, New York Courier Express to the Nanaimo Daily News in British Columbia. I was immediately suspicious of this story, as much as I enjoyed the phrase, dipper of boiling corn juice. So, podcast listener, whether you were looking to add a new drink item to the menu of your roadside diner, or a new name for your bluegrass cover band, I bet you're glad you tuned in today. Bonus points to the newspaper writer who correctly identified the rattlesnakes as venomous, not poisonous. But what was the story doing in the New York Times? And more importantly, why couldn't I find it in local North Carolina newspapers? Surely news hounds in Gastonia 4 miles to the south, Charlotte 25 miles to the east, or Shelby 25 miles to the west would have been aware of this intriguing and adventurous story. That did not seem to be the case. I could not find the story in any North Carolina newspaper, so I reached out to a librarian at the State Library of North Carolina. She found the article on page 1 of the Greensboro North State newspaper on October 12th, 2 weeks after the story's premiere in the New York Times and the Boston Globe. It was identical to the New York Times piece. However, it does not seem to have run in any other North Carolina newspapers. How did Folias avoid being on the front page of his hometown paper, the Gaston Gazette, or the nearby Charlotte Observer? The librarian went the extra mile and attempted to find Charles Folias in census records for 1860, 1870, and 1880 without any luck. There is no mention of him before the serpent-assisted arrest or stories about him after his brush with venomous death. No trial coverage, no prison sentence. The Salisbury, Connecticut Western News and the Morrisville, Vermont News and Citizen state that their reports were based on a letter from Dallas, North Carolina. If you look at the newspaper stories as a whole, some of the articles are shorter and have fewer details, but none of them have details that aren't in the original New York Times article. So even if you will find accounts of Charles Folias in newspapers, websites, and in more than one book, I have $5 American that says the wily moonshiner existed only in the imagination of a Gaston County letter writer. There's no doubt that Huldah Nines, Woman Moonshiner, was a real person. She was featured in multiple newspaper stories, from her arrest to her trial and sentencing, as well as her release from prison. Likewise, revenue agents Hare and Perkins are easily found in multiple stories over the years, either for raids or court testimony. An article in the Monday, December 14, 1903 Nashville Banner carried an item about Huldah's release from prison. It read, Woman Moonshiner. Huldah Nines, the woman moonshiner from North Carolina, who has been serving a term as a federal prisoner in the Tennessee Penitentiary, was released today and will return to North Carolina. She will probably go to Raleigh and undertake to secure work in one of the cotton mills there, as she has made a good hand in the knitting mills in the prison and goes out much better prepared to earn an honest living than when she entered. That's it for this episode of the Blue Ridge True Crime Podcast. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing. Check the show notes for links to the Blue Ridge True Crime Substack and YouTube channel, and any story-related links. Until next time, I'll look for you on the back roads.